Hey, it's Jordan with Status Coup. The Democratic Party and its elites continue their very early pressure campaign to get Cornel West to drop out or shame him into submission, even before he's officially the Green Party nominee, which would not happen if it happens until next year. This latest exchange was surprisingly between David Axelrod, who was Obama's senior advisor, helped him get elected, then was big official in the Obama administration, now a CNN hack. And of all people, Chris Cuomo, formerly of CNN, got fired over all of his shenanigans, helping his disgraced governor brother, Andrew Cuomo, who's now on News Nation. And they had a tit for tat on Twitter where Chris Cuomo, of all people, pretty establishment in terms of media, was making some sense. Let me show you this Twitter exchange, and then we'll kind of get into it here. It started, if you didn't see, with David Axelrod, believe a week ago or so. He said, in 2016, the Green Party played an outsized role in tipping the election to Donald Trump. Now, with Cornel West as their likely nominee, they could easily do it again. Risky business. So, this created a whole news cycle. CNN covered it. MSNBC covered it. They had David Axelrod on. Again, there was no thought to, well, maybe something needs to be done to persuade voters who are considering going third party or Cornel West to vote for Biden. I don't know, executive actions by Biden, bold pledges to actually follow through on his promises, minimum wage, public option, actually taking the climate inferno serious, on record, making bold promises, saying, I will not make excuses like the parliamentarian and every other which way. Not that I would necessarily believe it, but these are things Democrats can do to persuade voters. That has not really entered the equation for David Axelrod. It's just huffing and puffing and fear-mongering and trying to shame voters into, it's on you if the apocalypse comes and the world ends if Trump gets reelected. It's not on us to try and convince you. So Chris Cuomo responded to that with, I think, a legitimate and correct take. He said, in response to Axelrod, this plays like a message to Brother West when it should be a wake-up call to the party. No, there is an entitlement from party elites who think anyone who questions the club is the problem. Zero sum ain't working for the country. Time for more than the other side is worse. I mean, dare I say, Chris Cuomo would never say this on CNN. Maybe now that he's on News Nation, who's probably just happy to have a name anchoring, because News Nation doesn't get much in terms of ratings. Maybe he's free to say the truth and speak his mind. And he makes an important point there. There's an elitism, there's an arrogance in the Democratic Party thinking it's actually the voters' responsibility to come to the country's aid, meaning it's the voters' responsibility to stop Trump or DeSantis or, name your autocratic wannabe fascist Republican leader. It's not the Democratic Party's responsibility to convince the voters through policy, actually making working class people's lives better. It's just the voters' responsibility to, after being deserted by the Democratic Party, particularly the working class for the last 40 years, hold your nose and vote for the people who are not actually going to do anything for you of substance, because other side worse. There is not only an arrogance in there, there's not only an elitism, there's a tone deafness in that equation that I think Chris Cuomo, who is plenty elite, I mean, he's from a very wealthy family, but he seems to understand it. And especially time for more than the other side is worse, which is basically what we've been getting from the Democratic Party for the last 30 years. So David Axelrod, not really, I think, registering what Chris Cuomo was saying, responded with more fear-mongering. If Trump were to win in 2024, it would mean more than the defeat of a Democrat, quote Chris Cuomo. It would be a repudiation of the rule of law upon which our democracy stands. These third-party candidacies, West certainly, make that outcome more likely. That is my message. Before I get to David Axelrod's, I think, kind of absurd tweet, we should point out there is some validity into, and there is not some, there is a lot of validity in terms of if Trump gets reelected, there is a threat to the rule of law. Not that we actually have a one-size-fits-all equal rule of law in this country. We have basically three legal systems, one for wealthy white people, one for kind of, sort of what's left of the middle class, generally white people, and one for Black, brown, and indigenous people. But, I mean, this is out in the media today. Trump and allies forged plans to increase his presidential powers in 2025. Their plans to centralize more power in the Oval Office stretch far beyond the former president's recent remarks that he would order a criminal investigation into Biden. Trump and his associates have a broader goal: alter the balance of power by increasing the president's authority over every part of the federal government that now operates by either law or tradition, with any measure of independence from political interference by the White House. According to reviews of the campaign's policy proposals, Trump intends to bring independent agencies like the FCC, which makes and enforces rules for television and internet companies, and the Federal Trade Commission, which enforces various antitrust and other consumer protection rules against business, under direct presidential control. He wants to revive the practice of impounding funds, refusing to spend money Congress has appropriated for programs a president doesn't like, a tactic that lawmakers banned under President Nixon. There's a lot more to it, and let's not sugarcoat it. It is dangerous, and it is a threat, and Trump would love to rule forever. I don't think he was joking about serving more than 2 terms and changing the Constitution. So there is legitimate threats that Trump poses. 2 things can be true. There are legitimate threats that a second Trump presidency poses. With that said, the Democrats' prescription of fear-mongering about that threat, but not actually persuading you on what they're going to do for you so that you will take that threat seriously, but also be persuaded that these people that are fear-mongering about the threats are actually going to make your life better. Not just, hey, vote for us, even though we're going to give you more of the same crumb cake. Actually trying to persuade them, that's not part of the equation. Actually trying to do something for them, that's not part of the equation. So another thing that David Axelrod said that doesn't particularly make much sense to me, I don't really know what he means, when he says it would be a repudiation of the rule of law upon which our democracy stands. These third-party candidacies, West certainly makes that outcome more likely. Well, you're either talking about if he is reelected, he would challenge the rule of law. But what I'm getting from this is he's saying his mere election would be a defeat of rule of law and democracy. First of all, I've said for a while, we don't actually have a democracy. You can't have a democracy if the popular vote does not win. When you have this undemocratic electoral college, when you look at the Princeton study from 2014, we live in an oligarchy, not a democracy. Over half the time, policy legislation of the majority does not go through, meaning majority will goes through, maybe less than 5% of the time, when the majority of the time it's what wealthy people and elites want that go through. That's not a democracy. But putting that aside, is David Axelrod saying that if voters in a free and fair election vote for Trump, that's not democracy? I mean, granted, if he wins, it would probably be losing the popular vote again, which over the last 20 years, Democrats have won the popular vote the majority of the time, but still lost the electoral college. But in our electoral college system, it wouldn't be a repudiation of democracy if in a free and fair election, Donald Trump won the election according to the electoral college. That would be an epic failure, not of democracy, but of the Democratic Party's policies and abandonment of working class people and poor people over the last 40 years, to the point that not only once did they vote for an orange orangutan used car salesman, but twice voted for an orange orangutan used car salesman, twice indicted. And by the election time, it might be thrice or 4 times indicted former president. That's not on the voters. That's on you for even being vulnerable. A Democratic candidate should be crushing Trump in polls right now by over 10 points minimum. That's not a rejection of democracy if Trump is reelected in a free and fair election. That's a rejection of neoliberalism, which is anti-democratic at its core. And Chris Cuomo kind of agreed and, stated that. Axe, you don't think the democracy can survive Trump? How would his re-election violate rule of law, assuming he did not cheat? The two-party system is failing the democracy, and nothing changes if nothing changes. That is my point. Axe. So he's making the point, how would his re-election violate rule of law, assuming he did not cheat? So this comes off to me almost like Democrats' version of stop the steal. You know, it's like, let's start suggesting him winning would overcome or topple democracy. I mean, again, we don't really have a democracy, but if he wins in a free and fair election in the Electoral College, which I think we need to get rid of, that is democracy. Doesn't mean you need to like the choice of voters, but that is technically democracy. Again, to me, real democracy is, one vote, majority will, popular vote wins. But again, you're seeing the same thing play out that happened in 2016 and 2020. 2016, Hillary Clinton outspends Trump 2-1, has all the credentials, even though to me, if you looked at her credentials, she was a terrible candidate. And she lost to Trump. Instead of actually looking inwardly and saying, what do we need to fix? How did things go so sour for the Democratic Party that all of these working class voters in the Midwest, particularly, that used to be the core of the Democratic Party, decided to vote for a billionaire phony populist? Maybe we need to start doing things differently. Instead of doing that, they moved further to the right and created Russiagate to blame Russia. In 2020, instead of realizing, actually, it wasn't really people voting for Joe Biden or voting for neoliberalism. We won because Trump really lost it due to his insanity, his terrible management of COVID. Instead of saying we still have to look inward and change our policies because we got really lucky with COVID in terms of Biden not having to really campaign and doing it out of his basement, and Trump so badly managing COVID that really a paper bag might have beat Trump. And I think Bernie would have crushed Trump by the data and polls. They took the wrong lessons. Let's double down and kind of do an Empire Strikes Back and bring back Obamaism in the form of an 80-year-old. But even worse. So I don't know. It just seems to me you're seeing the writing on the wall. And it's not only about Cornel West. It seems to me they have decided to win, we need the money. To get the money, we need the donors, Wall Street, fossil fuels, big real estate, big pharma, big tech. Biden can't actually do anything to persuade voters like executive actions, which American Prospect has done great work on all the executive actions Biden could have taken at the beginning of his presidency and can still take. I think they had a list of over 100. But they're not going to do that. Or Biden pledging, if you give me another 4 years, if you give us a Democratic House and a Senate, here are the things I would do in the first 100 days with a full Democratic House and Senate, minimum wage, public option, this and that. We're not seeking guidance from the parliamentarian. We're doing it whether the parliamentarian likes it or not, have that on the record from the president. So it's a lot easier to do a pressure campaign if he specifically is pledging these things and doing away with the preemptively doing away with the excuses. They're not going to do that because they know if Biden took executive actions that Wall Street wouldn't like, special interests wouldn't like, then there's less money coming in for him. Because the Wall Street and the special interests and the United Corporations of America could do whatever they want and could say whatever they want. But at the end of the day, as long as Democrat, Republican, they don't really care as long as the status quo maintains. Would they prefer it not be Trump because of the hysteria and chaos and the daily tweet insanity? Of course, they would prefer it not be Trump. But they'll gladly take Trump if the tax cuts continue, if the deregulation continues, if there is no further regulation of big tech, et cetera, et cetera. So there's a basic conflict where Biden's not going to do the things and the Democratic Party is not going to do the things that would persuade voters to, not vote third party, vote Democrats, like bold executive actions on the climate inverto. China just had record temperatures. Spain just had record temperatures. We're talking over the weekend. Obviously, the 4 days in a row of the hottest temperatures on record. They're not going to do that because they're too afraid to lose the money because they think the money is how they're going to beat Trump, not policies. But, kudos to Chris Cuomo, of all people. I will add his former network last week even started with the pressure campaign to make Cornel West drop out before he's even the the Green Party nominee. let's listen to Caitlin Collins just directly asking Cornel West, hey, if it gets down to the wire and you're at 2 or 3% in the key states, will you step aside and support Biden? Take a listen.
You're saying essentially you think that Democrats, well, not just Democrats, but that they have the wrong message. If you're looking at this at the election, it comes down to the wire. You're polling at, say, 2 or 3% in key battleground states. What do? Do you ultimately back President Biden like you did in 2020, or what would you do in that scenario, do you think?
Well, I mean, part of the challenge, my dear sister, is that, you got Trump. He's certainly a gangster, neo-fascist. He's, in many ways, promoting, if not promoting, that's too strong a word. But one effect of his work is to move toward a second civil war. With Biden, he's better in some ways on domestic issues, but he's leading us toward a third world war. So if we choose between the second civil war and the third world war, where are we? We're between a rock and a hard place. And that's where so many of us find ourselves, unable to really acknowledge the ways in which our system itself is just so toxic. The organized greed at the top, just hemorrhaging the best. The indifference, the levels of hatred and revenge. All I'm doing is saying is, hey, let us try another way that Fannie Lou Hamer already taught us, which is one of love and justice and community and solidarity with the least of these, and organizing and having strikes against organized greedy bosses, and then trying to somehow keep our democracy alive and dismantle the empire. See, I want to head the empire in order to dismantle it. We don't need 800 military units around the world. We don't need U.S. troops in over 100 countries. We need to be a nation among nations. We don't need to be the grand empire that every nation has to bow down to. I'm anti-empire, anti-imperialist in that sense, very much like Mark Twain and the most adorable American philosopher, William James.
I'll tell you what, I don't think this is a winning strategy from the Democratic Party, the Democratic elites. I think there's a couple things they could do to actually persuade some of these voters who are, saying I'm going third party or I'm going to consider third party. It's not rocket science how you convince people to vote for you. You actually improve their material conditions with bold policies. Will they do it, or will they not do it because they don't want to bite the special interest hand that feeds them from the donors of the United Corporations of America? Sadly, I think we know the answer.